The air was thick with sleet and silence as Camille Hart drove through the backroads of New Hampshire, her hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. The heater in her old minivan coughed feebly, battling the chill that seeped through every seam. In the back seat, her 6-year-old son, Lucas, leaned against the window, watching the snow cascade from the sky like powdered sugar on an invisible cake. "It's like a snow globe," he whispered, fogging up the glass. Camille smiled, though her heart was tight with worry. "Yeah, baby. Just colder." They'd been on the road since morning, traveling from Boston to a tiny town called Hartwell, where Camille had taken a job as a caretaker for an elderly author recovering from a stroke. It wasn't glamorous work, but it came with room, board, and the kind of stability she'd been craving for years. "Almost there," she murmured, glancing at the GPS. But the storm had other plans. Visibility dropped, and her knuckles turned white on the wheel. Just when she was beginning to question if they should keep going, a faded sign blinked in the storm: Willow's Edge Café, home cooking since 1965. "Looks like we're stopping for dinner," she said, pulling into the lot. Lucas clapped. "Do they have pancakes? If they have a griddle, they better." The cafe was a relic, nestled between pine trees and time. Its neon sign flickered with the stubbornness of an old soul refusing to be forgotten. As they stepped inside, a bell jingled overhead, releasing a wave of warmth, cinnamon, and something intangible, like safety in a storm. The booths were worn but clean, the walls lined with photographs of smiling faces, Polaroids pinned up like family snapshots. A waitress with silver-streaked hair handed them menus and poured Camille a mug of hot cider without asking. "Storm's getting worse," she said with a nod to the window. "You folks traveling far?" "Just Hartwell," Camille replied. "New job?" The waitress smiled with something like recognition. "Ah, the Carver place. Big old house. Load of stories in those walls." Camille's stomach growled. "Well, let's start our own story with a grilled cheese." As the waitress walked off, Camille took a moment to breathe, to look at her son with his rosy cheeks and wonder-filled eyes. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. And for a woman who'd been running on fumes for years, that was enough. Until Lucas froze mid-sip. His eyes locked on something, or someone, across the room. "Mom," he whispered, voice trembling. "That man." Camille turned, following his gaze. In the corner booth sat a man alone, early 40s, salt and pepper hair beneath a beanie, a half-eaten sandwich in front of him. He was scribbling in a notebook, a pen moving like it had something urgent to say. Before Camille could ask what Lucas meant, her son slid from the booth and began walking, no, sprinting, toward the stranger. "Lucas!" Camille stood abruptly, heart lurching into her throat. Wait. Too late. Lucas reached the man's table, breathless, eyes wide. "Dad?" he said. The cafe went still. Even the radio, playing something soft and jazzy, seemed to pause. The man looked up, startled. His mouth opened, closed. His eyes, a deep gray, flicked between Lucas and Camille as she approached. "I'm so sorry," she said, grabbing her son's hand, her voice cracking with embarrassment and alarm. "He's confused. We're tired. Please don't." But the man raised a hand gently. "It's okay." Lucas stared at him with a strange intensity, not fear, not confusion, something more like recognition. "I saw you in my dream," he said simply. "You were holding my hand." Camille's skin prickled. The man swallowed, visibly shaken. "What's your name?" "Lucas." The man exhaled, like the name had hit something old and soft inside him. Camille pulled her son back, murmuring an apology again, trying to gather herself, her thoughts, her racing heart. But as she glanced back, the man reached into his coat and took out a worn photograph. Camille's breath hitched. It was her. Or rather, a younger version of her. Smiling, wind in her hair, holding a sketchbook on a Boston park bench. The photo had been folded and unfolded so many times, the creases had become part of her face. She hadn't seen him in over a decade. "Camille?" He said her name like a question, like a prayer. It echoed through her like thunder. "Elliot," she whispered. Suddenly, she was 23 again, standing on a rooftop with him under July fireworks, thinking love was enough to rewrite the rules of the world. But he had vanished. No letter. No call. Just gone. Now, here he was. In a cafe on the edge of nowhere. Looking at her like he'd never stopped searching. She grabbed Lucas's hand tighter, her voice sharp. "We should go." "Camille, wait, please." He stood up slowly, notebook forgotten. "I didn't know. I didn't." She turned, shielding her son. "You don't get to pretend now. Not after disappearing. I thought. He began, but stopped. His face crumpled with guilt. I didn't know you had a son. Camille's expression hardened. That's because you weren't around to know. She walked out, Lucas quiet beside her, the warmth of the cafe evaporating behind them. But even as the cold bit into her cheeks, Camille's mind couldn't shake the look in Elliot's eyes. Because it wasn't just recognition. It was something else. Something terrifying. Something like truth. The snow had quieted by the time Camille reached the motel at the edge of Hartwell, a low-slung building with flickering porch lights and rooms that smelled faintly of damp carpet and forgotten dreams. Lucas fell asleep almost instantly, curled up on one of the twin beds with his stuffed tiger tucked beneath his chin. Camille sat in the creaky armchair by the window, staring out at the frost-laced world and wondering how the past had found its way back to her. Elliot. The name scraped at her chest like a scar that had never fully healed. She hadn't spoken it aloud in years. 10 years ago, they were inseparable, Camille and Elliot, the art student and the aspiring writer, wild in love, poor in money, but rich in dreams. They made plans to travel, to build a life around poems and paint, to prove the world wrong. Then, one day, he disappeared. No explanation. No goodbye. One morning he just didn't show up for brunch. Didn't text. Didn't return calls. Days turned into weeks, weeks into silence. Eventually, Camille stopped asking. She had to. She'd always believed that love could be enough, until he proved her wrong. And now? Now her son had called him Dad. Camille pressed her hand against her forehead, willing herself to breathe. It had to be a coincidence. Maybe Lucas saw something familiar in Elliot's face. Maybe it was just the stress, the snowstorm, the long drive, all of it blending into a weird hallucination. Except Elliot had pulled out that photo. A photo she hadn't even known existed. Taken during a summer picnic when she was sketching in the park and laughing at something Elliot had said. He must have snapped it without her noticing. And yet it had been creased and worn, like it had lived in his wallet for a decade. Which begged the question, why? Camille dug through her purse until she found the old manila folder marked Lucas, donor records. Her hand hesitated, hovering above it like she was about to open Pandora's box. The file was from 6 years ago, when she'd decided to become a single mother. She hadn't needed a man to build a family, just a willing donor and the courage to go it alone. She flipped open the file. The profile had been basic: age, height, blood type, academic background. Anonymous male donor number 1147. No photo. No name. Just a code name, E.H. Willow. Her eyes narrowed. Willow. Like the cafe. And the initials. E.H. Elliot Harper. Her breath caught. The pieces aligned too perfectly. She remembered one odd detail about the donor profile that had stood out at the time. A single line written in the personal statement box. If this creates life, may that life be surrounded by wonder. At the time, she'd thought it was poetic, maybe a little pretentious. But now? It sounded like something Elliot would write. Camille's mind spun. Could it be? Could the anonymous donor she'd chosen in the clinic, a faceless man reduced to statistics and checkboxes, have been the same man who once whispered Neruda into her ear? She slammed the folder shut. It was impossible. Or maybe it wasn't. But either way, she needed answers. The next day, snow clung to the trees like lace as Camille stood outside the Willow's Edge Cafe once more. Lucas was at the motel with a coloring book and a promise not to open the door for anyone. She needed to do this alone. Elliot was already there, sitting in the corner booth, notebook closed this time. He looked up when she entered, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but there was no mistaking the way he straightened, like she was the only person in the room. Camille slid into the booth across from him. "Why are you here?" she asked, no softness in her tone. "I live here now," he said simply. "Moved back a few months ago. I was tired of the city. Too many ghosts." "You left me," she said, voice brittle. He nodded. "I did. No explanation. No letter. Just gone. I was a coward." His voice didn't rise. He didn't defend himself. "My father threatened to cut me off if I didn't break things off. Said you weren't good enough. Said I was ruining my future. I wanted to fight him, but he shook his head. "I was stupid. I let fear win." Camille laughed bitterly. "So you vanished. Like I never mattered." "You did. You always did." Her hands tightened around her coffee mug. "You don't get to say that. Not after 10 years of silence." He swallowed. "You're right." They sat in silence for a moment, the quiet between them thick with everything unsaid. "Lucas," he said finally. He's mine? Camille hesitated. I used a donor, she admitted. Clinic in Boston. It was anonymous. But the donor profile used the code EHWLO. There was a quote in the statement that sounded like you. Elliot reached into his coat again. This time, he pulled out a slip of paper. Typed on it was the very same donor profile. He laid it on the table between them. I registered as a donor after my father died, he said. I wanted to give someone else the chance to create life, even if I couldn't be part of it. I chose the name Willow because it reminded me of you. That summer in Cambridge. The café we used to visit. Camille stared at the paper, then at him. So you didn't know? He shook his head. I had no idea. Not until yesterday. When he called me Dad, I thought my heart was going to fall out of my chest. Tears pricked at the corners of Camille's eyes, but she blinked them away. You're not his father, she said, though the words felt uncertain now. Not really. I raised him. I chose to do this alone. I know, Elliot said. And I won't take that from you. I don't want to disrupt anything. I want to know him. If you'll let me. Camille didn't answer right away. She thought of Lucas, of the way he'd looked at Elliot, not like a stranger, but like a wish fulfilled. She thought of all the nights she'd sat beside his bed, wondering how to answer when he asked about his dad. Maybe this wasn't about what she wanted anymore. Maybe it was about what Lucas deserved. I don't trust easily, she said finally. And I don't forgive quickly. I wouldn't expect you to, Elliot replied. But I'll be here. No pressure. No expectations. Just here. Camille looked down at her coffee, then back up at him. Then we'll start with that. She stood to leave. But before she turned away, she added softly, he likes dinosaurs. And pancakes with chocolate chips. A smile touched the corner of Elliot's mouth. I'll remember that. Outside, the snow had begun to melt, leaving behind patches of earth and something else, something new. Something like a beginning. It started with a cotton swab. A sterile clinic. Beige walls. A scent of rubbing alcohol and unease in the air. Camille sat on a worn leather chair in the corner of a small examination room, watching her son swing his legs as a nurse dabbed his cheek with a cotton pad. Lucas didn't flinch. He looked curiously around the room like he was in a spaceship, not a clinic where his life might be changed by a test that would fit on one sheet of paper. Across the room, Elliot sat in a matching chair, his elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. The silence was louder than the fluorescent lights buzzing above them. Camille had agreed to this only after a week of thought, a week of sleepless nights, phone calls to a family lawyer, reading parenting blogs until her vision blurred. She wasn't obligated to know the truth. Legally, biologically, she was all Lucas had ever needed. But something in her shifted the moment Lucas whispered, I think he knew me, Mommy. He deserved to know the truth. Not because he lacked anything, but because Camille believed in truth. Even when it scared her. Test results should be ready in 5 to 7 business days, the nurse said with a practiced smile, snapping off her gloves. Lucas hopped down from the table. Do I get a sticker? 2, she replied, handing him a dinosaur and a space rocket. As they left the clinic, Elliot offered to walk them to the car. Camille hesitated, but allowed it. Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering brown leaves across the parking lot like tiny messengers. Camille buckled Lucas into his seat. He immediately grabbed his tablet and headphones. Elliot stood by her side, hands deep in his coat pockets. I appreciate you doing this, he said quietly. She didn't respond right away. I didn't do it for you. He nodded. I know. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Camille didn't look away. It doesn't change anything, Elliot, she said softly. Not what I've done. Not what I've been to him. I'm not trying to take your place, he said. I just want to find mine. Camille opened her door. We'll see what the test says. And with that, she drove off, leaving Elliot standing alone in the wind. The waiting was the worst part. For days, Camille went about life in slow motion, waking early, preparing meals for her patient, Mr. Abernathy, an aging novelist whose wit hadn't dimmed despite a stroke that slowed his speech. Lucas returned to his routines easily, as though nothing had changed. He drew pictures in his sketchbook, rockets, animals, sometimes a trio of stick figures. Lately, one of them had a beard and gray hair. Camille couldn't bring herself to ask. At night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, asking herself questions with no right answers. If the test said Elliot was the father, would it mean she owed him something? Would she have to share Lucas? Would he have rights? Would he leave again? And worst of all, Was she strong enough to let someone else love the child she'd built her world around? When the email arrived, Camille was sitting on the front porch of the carriage house behind Mr. Abernathy's estate, sipping tea that had long gone cold. She felt the vibration in her phone like a heartbeat. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Subject line, paternity test results, confidential. She took a deep breath, opened it, and read the first line. Probability of paternity, 99.87%. The world seemed to tilt. She set the phone down, pressed her palm to her mouth. And for a moment, she just sat there, eyes wide, heart quiet, as if absorbing the news required silence. It was him. Elliot Harper was Lucas's biological father. She didn't cry. Didn't scream. She just felt something inside her rearrange. Lucas came bounding out of the house minutes later, holding a Lego figure in one hand and his sketchbook in the other. "Mommy. Look. I built a spaceship with a hidden snack drawer." She smiled as he climbed into her lap, pressing his forehead against hers. "Can I ask you something?" he whispered, suddenly serious. "Of course." He traced one finger down her cheek. "That man from the diner. If he is my dad, does that mean you won't be my mom anymore?" Camille's heart cracked wide open. "No, baby," she said, wrapping him into her arms. "Not ever. Being your mom is forever. Nothing will change that." He nodded, satisfied. "Okay. Then it's fine if he's my dad too. Maybe he can build Lego castles." Camille kissed the crown of his head. "Maybe." Later that night, after Lucas had fallen asleep surrounded by a fortress of blankets and plastic bricks, Camille stood outside with her phone clutched in hand. The stars above Hartwell blinked like old souls watching with curiosity. She dialed. Elliot answered on the first ring. "You got it," he said, breathless. "I did." A pause. "And? It's you." The line went silent. Camille heard the exhale. Heard his voice tremble. I don't even know what to say." "Don't say anything," she replied. "Just listen." "I'm listening." "I need time, Elliot. Before I tell Lucas. Before anything else. I need to figure out how to do this the right way." "Whatever you need," he said instantly. "I'll wait. I'll follow your lead." That surprised her. She'd expected urgency, a request for time with Lucas, for involvement, for something. But all she heard was stillness. "I don't want to confuse him," she continued. "He's so steady. So secure. He's never asked why he doesn't have a dad. I think he just accepted it." "I don't want to be a disruption," Elliot said. "I want to be an addition. If there's room." Camille blinked against tears she hadn't known were waiting. "You're not entitled to anything," she said. "I know. You don't get to be here because of biology." "I don't want that," he said softly. "I want permission." The word landed like a stone in water, ripples moving outward. She stood there, the wind tugging at her sweater, heart thudding like a door quietly knocking from the inside. "I'll let you know," she said. "Okay." They hung up. But the silence that followed didn't feel like an ending. It felt like breath held. Like the beginning of something careful. Something real. Hartwell bloomed slowly into early spring. It wasn't the kind of bloom that demanded attention, no sudden explosions of color or sunshine. Just subtle things. The creek began to thaw, trickling again beneath bridges. Birds returned in cautious bursts of song. And Camille Hart began to notice a shift not just in the town but in herself. The heaviness she'd carried since receiving the paternity results hadn't disappeared. But it was no longer a boulder. More like a small, warm stone she could carry in her pocket. Something real. Something manageable. She still hadn't told Lucas the full truth. Not yet. She was waiting for the right time, though she was beginning to wonder if that time would ever feel right. What mattered more, she decided, was readiness, not perfection. Meanwhile, Elliot had taken her words seriously. He didn't rush, didn't crowd. Instead, he showed up. In quiet, thoughtful ways. A week after their phone call, he left a small box on Camille's porch, not flowers, not jewelry, but a watercolor set. Inside was a note in his unmistakable handwriting, "In case you're still painting. Or want to start again." She hadn't touched the brush in years. But that night, after Lucas went to sleep, she opened the box. Just held the brush in her hand. Let herself remember. The next day, he was at the school fundraiser. Not to make a grand gesture, just helping carry boxes of books and pouring juice. Lucas spotted him and waved. Camille saw it from a distance, her son smiling at a man who wasn't yet a father, but wasn't a stranger either. Something was building. A few days later, On a Saturday morning that smelled like rain and soil, Camille walked into the living room to find Lucas drawing on the hardwood floor with a rainbow of crayons. He looked up and asked, "Can I see him again?" Her breath caught. "Elliot?" Lucas nodded, casual. "Yeah." He said my name right. The first time. Like he already knew it. Camille sat beside him. "Would you like to spend time with him?" Lucas considered the question carefully. "Can we bring pancakes?" "Sure," she said, her voice smaller than intended. "Okay," he said, already returning to his drawing. The following weekend, they met at Redfern Park, a place Camille remembered from her own childhood. Its cracked fountain still stood crooked in the center, but the trees arched overhead like protective hands. A faded picnic table near the trail made the perfect place for their meeting. Elliot was already there, a thermos and 2 boxes of take-out pancakes waiting on the bench. He stood as they approached, nervousness dancing in his fingers. Lucas ran ahead. "Hi." He beamed. "I brought syrup packets." Elliot laughed, crouching to his level. "Then we're saved." They sat, ate, laughed. Lucas dipped everything, sausage, eggs, a strawberry, into syrup and proclaimed it genius. Camille watched from the other side of the table. She didn't need to direct. The two of them seemed to find their rhythm without her guidance. Later, they walked through the trail together, Lucas holding one of Elliot's hands and dragging a stick in the dirt with the other. Camille caught Elliot watching him, not as someone in awe, but someone remembering something he didn't know he'd lost. "He's a lot like you," Elliot said quietly. Camille shook her head. "He's better." They paused at a low bridge that crossed a shallow stream. Lucas ran ahead, tossing pebbles into the water. "I was scared," Elliot said. "When he called me Dad at the café. It was like lightning." She didn't respond. He continued, "But it wasn't guilt. It wasn't shame. It was clarity. Like the earth shifted a little. Like something had clicked into place I didn't even know was missing." Camille looked at him. Not as the man who'd vanished. Not as the boy she once loved. But as the man standing before her now, present, open, changed. "He's not a project," she said. "Not your redemption." "I know," Elliot said. "He's a person. And I want to know him. Not to make up for anything. Just to be part of what's next." Camille nodded slowly. Then, almost instinctively, she said, "He wants to know you too." It wasn't a declaration. It was permission. The next few weeks passed in a kind of quiet bloom. Not romance, not yet. Just steady presence. Small steps. Shared space. Elliot came over every Sunday afternoon. Sometimes he brought books, or pancakes, or puzzles. Sometimes he just brought himself. Lucas didn't question it. He began calling him Elliot with familiarity, like a character in a beloved book. He didn't ask for labels. He didn't need definitions. He simply accepted. Camille found herself watching them more than speaking. Observing how Lucas lit up around Elliot. How Elliot remembered to cut the crust off sandwiches. How he listened when Lucas talked about volcanoes or invisible monsters or whether clouds had feelings. It was quiet magic. One rainy night, after Lucas fell asleep curled against Elliot during an old movie, Camille walked him to the door. Elliot paused under the porch light, mist clinging to his jacket. "You let me in," he said, not as a question, but as wonder. Camille folded her arms. "You didn't knock down the door." They stood in silence, rain falling like a soft song. "I know I don't get to ask for anything," Elliot began. "But I want you to know. If this ever becomes something more, I'll be here. Not because I want the life I missed, but because I want this life. With him. With you. If you'll ever want me to." Camille studied him. The quietness in his voice. The steadiness in his gaze. "You don't have to win me," she said finally. "You just have to keep showing up." He nodded. "That's the plan." She turned back toward the house. "Good night, Camille." "Good night, Elliot." But what she meant was, not yet. But maybe. 3 days later, Lucas left a note on the kitchen table, written in blue crayon. It read, "Dear Elliot, I'm glad you came back. I like your pancakes and the stories. If you want to be part of our family, you can. Mommy says families can grow. Love, Lucas." Camille read it once. Then twice. Then tucked it inside her journal. She didn't cry. But her walls shifted. Just a little more. Just enough to let something in. The wind was soft that day, curling around the tall grasses at the edge of Hartwell like an old lullaby. It was the first truly warm afternoon in months, the kind that whispered of summer just ahead, of possibilities still waking up. Camille stood in front of the small yellow cottage on the outskirts of town, holding a cardboard box filled with art supplies and books. Lucas ran ahead, arms out like airplane wings, laughing as he weaved between wildflowers and sunlight. The cottage was simple, white trim, a crooked mailbox, a yard that needed taming, but it was theirs. The paperwork had been signed the week before. Camille and Elliot hadn't made any grand declarations, no one dropped to one knee, and no speeches were given beneath starry skies. But they had made something better than promises. They had made space. Shared parenting time. Shared dinners. Shared mornings where Lucas climbed into their laps in his pajamas and told them about dreams involving dragons and pancake planets. They didn't label it. Didn't rush to define it. But slowly, deliberately, they were building a life. One moment at a time. As Camille unpacked the last box in what would be her new studio, sun-drenched, finally, Elliot walked in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He paused at the doorway, watching her tuck a framed photo of Lucas into place on a shelf beside dried paintbrushes and a single, weathered postcard that read, "Keep what matters." "You're nesting," he said gently. "I'm reorganizing," she corrected, though her smile gave her away. He set the mugs down and leaned against the doorframe. "Lucas is making a crown out of sticks and asking if he's allowed to be king of the backyard." Camille sipped her coffee. "He's always been royalty. We're just his humble staff." A pause settled between them, comfortable, like breath. Then Elliot reached into his back pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "I didn't know when the right moment would be," he said, "but maybe there's never a perfect one." He handed it to her. Camille unwrapped it slowly. Inside was the ring. Her mother's ring. The one she'd given back to Camille when she was 18 and on the verge of everything. Camille looked up, confused. "I found it on the kitchen counter yesterday," he said. "I wasn't sure if it was a message or an accident." "It wasn't an accident," she said quietly. She stepped forward and pressed the ring into his palm again. "But it's not a proposal. It's not a question. It's an agreement." He nodded slowly. "To what?" "To keep showing up," she said. "To carry the hard things together. To be better. For Lucas. For each other. For ourselves." His fingers closed around the ring, not like a possession, but like a prayer. "I can do that," he whispered. She leaned forward, touching her forehead to his. "Then we're already doing it." That night, the 3 of them sat around a fire pit in the backyard. The sky stretched wide above them, a canvas of quiet stars. Lucas wore his crown of sticks and told a story about a time-traveling dog who saved the moon. Camille and Elliot listened, heads tilted, eyes full of joy that didn't need to be spoken. Later, after Lucas had been tucked in, Camille and Elliot sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket. The crickets chirped a rhythm that felt old and new all at once. Elliot reached for her hand. Not in desperation. Not in triumph. Just presence. "I used to think love had to be dramatic," he said. "Loud. Big. But this is what I never knew I needed." She rested her head against his shoulder. "I used to think I had to do it all alone," she replied. "That trusting someone again would be weakness." He kissed the top of her head. "You trusted yourself first," he said. "That's the bravest thing of all." Weeks passed. Then months. And life took on a new rhythm. Camille painted again, not just for clients, but for joy. Elliot returned to writing, sometimes reading chapters aloud while Lucas doodled imaginary monsters on the backs of grocery receipts. They weren't perfect. They were hard days. Long nights. Times when fear crept back in and old scars whispered lies. But each time, they reached for each other. Not to fix, but to be there. One summer afternoon, Lucas handed Camille a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" she asked. "It's our map," he said proudly. "To the forever place." She opened it. Crayon drawings. A big tree. A sun with a smiling face. 3 stick figures, one with braids, one with a beard, one small with a crown. Underneath, in shaky handwriting, he'd written, "Home is where we all try." Camille looked up, tears pricking her eyes. Elliot was standing in the doorway, watching. And in that moment, she knew, they weren't chasing some ideal. They weren't fixing the past. They were writing a new story, one with second chances, stitched together by small kindnesses, shared silences, and the quiet bravery of love that chooses to stay. Not the love that arrives like a storm, but the kind that lingers like light,